United Lutheran Seminary presents the Seminary Explores podcast, conversations on faith, art, people, politics, theology, life, and more, with voices from around the corner and around the globe.
A political crisis right on our doorsteps in the nation in Central America of Nicaragua. Our guest today is very well qualified to talk to us about Nicaragua. She is Ms. Gretchen Natter. She's the communications liaison for Project Gettysburg Leon, connecting the little town where we're broadcasting and a significant small town in Nicaragua. She's the executive director of the Center for Public Service, which is worth an interview in itself sometime. And in addition to that, she's the assistant dean of college life. It takes more time to read off your qualifications than it does to have a conversation.
Certainly.
What is the situation why is it a political crisis, Gretchen?
Why is it a political crisis? So, Jerry, thanks for having me, first of all, and for giving us a platform to tell the story. So on April 19th, there were student protests, university students in Nicaragua, particularly in Managua, on that first day, protesting a decision by President Daniel Ortega and his government to roll back Social Security benefits in a variety of ways. And those students were supported in kind of a new situation for Nicaragua. Those students were supported by the business community. Usually historically, those two groups have been divided in the country. So the situations quickly escalated as the students became more vocal and the crowds grew. Nicaraguan police took to the streets and began shooting into the crowds. And we saw an escalation of the violence grow over the following weeks, with paramilitaries assumed to be backed by the Sandinista government. But again, nothing is very clear, but entering people's homes, taking people prisoner, taking them to unknown locations, some people disappearing for good, others being returned after being questioned, and some say they were tortured. Tranques or roadblocks were built by the protesters all over the country as a way to block the paramilitaries from coming into neighborhoods. And so they took up the paving stones from the streets and built these significant roadblocks. All of this really disrupted life in Nicaragua, where kids weren't going to schools. Their parents wanted to make sure that they were safe, so they were home. Businesses weren't seeing the business that they were used to because vehicles couldn't get through to get to places. Universities shut down. Businesses, due to that decreased activity, started closing. Various non-governmental organizations also began closing their doors because a lot of them rely on income from groups traveling from outside Nicaragua into Nicaragua. And that's, again, a major form of funding for them, but those groups were no longer coming.
There's enough there to concern any government, but there's the personal side. You and many people around this country are involved as Americans in a cooperative sort of agreement. I mean, it's back and forth. It's back and forth, right? We're doing something in Leon, which is a major city, and Leon is doing something for us. We're sitting outside a room right now where there's a wonderful painting by a Spanish-speaking artist who came to be in residence here at one time. So what has it meant? What effects has it had on you personally, on the program that you helped to direct in Nicaragua?
Right. So Project Gettysburg Leon is largely centered in the neighborhood of Sutiaba in Leon, Nicaragua. And what we've seen in that neighborhood are families feeling like they need to seclude themselves in their homes, that folks not going to work, children not going to schools. The art school that we partner with has shut its doors for weeks. Even when they've tried to open their doors to offer the regular painting, folkloric dance, drawing classes, children aren't coming, because their families have wanted to keep them close. That's beginning to change a little bit. But even as schools have opened again, attendance has been low as people slowly regain trust that their families will be safe on the street.
And you have a director there?
We do have a director.
Full-time?
Our office is there in Sutiaba. Our director lives in the office. It's also a home. And they have generally felt safe, though we have taken down the sign for the office just to be sure, just as an extra precaution that was recommended to us by our Nicaraguan advisors. Meanwhile, our Nicaraguan advisors they've been affected in a variety of ways. One is a school teacher, and so her income has been challenged as she's not been teaching as much lately, even though she has a full-time certified job. Others have been challenged in accessing the health care that they need. So, for example, the major hospital in Leon that many of our friends access, they fired 35 doctors from that hospital for treating the revolutionaries, for the people protesting the government. And so that all affects the daily lived experience.
And your
of
director,
our
is
friends.
he or she safe? The people who
Yes.
listen to this program occasionally will know we have always tried to interview the on-site director there to find out what's going on in one of our neighboring countries. And what's the situation with the current director?
Right. So Steve Lewis is our current country director, and his wife, Kath Austin, is the PGL associate. And so they have been safe. They did choose to leave Nicaragua and work from a distance for a month when kind of the violence was at a height. There had been a few people in Sutiaba in the neighborhood dragged from their homes and killed. 3 people in Sutiaba killed around the corner from the office. So at that point, they decided to leave for a month. But now they describe the situation in Nicaragua as a whole, but also in Sutiaba as tense calm. And the Ortega government is calling it normalization again. We also have friends in different parts of the country. So, for example, a former director, Greg Bowles, who has been interviewed on this program, he and his wife has a great NGO called Fuproso Munique, which works with women around solar power and empowerment and building small businesses. They have been isolated on their farm and from time to time have tried. For example, they went to the grocery store recently in town near their farm and quickly found themselves quickly getting their groceries because there was to be a pro-government rally that day. And in preparation, they saw paramilitaries climbing down from trucks, heavily armed to control the crowds. And so, again, they were just going to get groceries and felt threatened.
Well, which reminds me then that there are both sides on this. The president makes sure that the people who supported him, in fact, it has been a movement that predates his election. That we'll get to in a minute. So there are both sides on this, but the government obviously is favoring one side, the pro-government, so-called pro-government side.
Right.
And the protesters usually are the ones who are roughed up and whose liberties are taken away from them.
Right.
We're talking to Gretchen Natter about a political crisis on our doorstep in Nicaragua and the personal effects of persons who have dedicated themselves to building relationships. It's hard to say nowadays who are there to help. We're not there to give handouts. It's not paternalism.
No.
We're not the patron system. We're there to learn and to receive as well as to give. But at any rate, the personal effects are quite dramatic. What's the context of all this? If I might start your thinking by having an amateurish insight about the ironies of history. Daniel Ortega was the leader of the opposition. He was the revolutionary in the days of President Ronald Reagan and was opposed by our government and led the Sandinista movement until finally things were somewhere. And he went on to win not by force but by election.
Yes.
And today he is
president.
The president and the autocrat.
Right. And with his opposers often now accusing him of adopting the tactics of the dictator that he was part of overthrowing.
He's been there for 30 years, and have things improved in any way? Let's give him a fair shake. Has he been able to make some improvements or changes?
That's such the interesting thing, right? And that's what makes the story so complex. So yes, Ortega was the first president after Somoza was overthrown in the 70s, right? And then he was president through the 80s and the Contra War, which was funded by the United States. But then he was elected out with Violeta Chamorro, or, kind of like this beautiful Nicaraguan mother who had sons killed who were fighting both on the Contra side and on the Sandinista side. But she was backed by the U.S. government, and so she could promise that this civil war would end. And so she was elected handily. So Ortega was out of power for a good 15 or 16 years in there, but then was reelected again. I don't have the exact date, but, something like 10 years ago, something like that, 10, 12 years ago. And since his re-election, things have improved. The standard of living has raised, the middle class has been growing. We've seen the average income grow slightly, slowly but surely.
And relatively speaking, in context,
Right. There's more access to education. We're seeing more of those things going on, as well as kind of like a vibrant. When you go to visit Nicaragua, you notice more businesses. You notice more families kind of taking on this entrepreneurial spirit. So things have been good. Yeah. He did increase access to education. He did put all of these great programs into place. And so when this decision came, but at the same, so he could sell this idea of reform and improvement. Yep. But at the same time, he was also doing things that some people disagreed with by aligning himself with much more conservative voices, by continuing to kind of set aside the voice of feminist leaders and saying we need to do things for the whole of the country and not necessarily pay attention to women's specific issues. And so, there were these alignments that caused some people to start speaking against him, even within the Sandinista party.
The Social Security issue, this would certainly be anti-popular, would it not? I mean, that's asking the people to make a great sacrifice. And is that related in any way to charges of corruption or cronyism or wasting money?
Yeah, see, that's difficult to tell because there doesn't seem to be any government corruption per se, like spending tax dollars for his personal gain, but maybe his ability to, some reports point to him building businesses or supporting family members in building busises over time.
So the case is complex. It's ambiguous. He has popular support. He's been overwhelmingly elected twice.
Right.
He has made some improvements. But what keeps him from holding an election and being reelected again?
So I think so there were term limits where when presidencies, you were limited to 2 6-year terms, I believe, 2 5 or 6 year terms. But he worked with the Supreme Court a couple of years ago so that he could be elected for a third term. Okay, and so again, that's where some of the opposition started building against him. And so we're not that far into his third term. And so his argument is that by calling for an emergency election now, you destabilize all of these good things that have been happening, which to some extent is true. I think it's also fair to say maybe some more educated analyzers of the situation might argue with me, but it's not clear who the next generation of leadership is. It's not clear who the next. The Sandinistas have tended to be the more liberal party historically. It's not clear who the next generation
Yeah.
of leaders are.
Yeah.
When you name the leaders of the Sandinista Party, they're aging. They still represent the revolution of the 70s.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, Castro and other leaders like that who have turned into semi-autocrats or autocrats have the same problem. What can we do about all this? We're sitting here talking about it. Easy to talk about. Are there things we can actually continue to do to help support, especially in particular those programs that are geared toward people and not necessarily governments only?
Yeah. What I would say is one thing that I admire about Nicaragua, one thing that is kind of a leftover from the Contra-War days, are these sister city projects and kind of this plethora of NGOs who are there in the country working. Many of those NGOs have also kind of taken on more in-country Nicaraguan leadership. And so there is this spirit of empowerment and education and development. So when a person can find an organization that matches their values, and those organizations really do need financial support. They need that show of solidarity in many ways. I think another thing that
So join one of these
joining an
wherever you are.
organization wherever
if you're in
you
this
are.
area, PGL serves that purpose.
Yeah, and so here locally in Gettysburg, if you're here visiting or if you live here, there are several events that you can take part in the coming weeks. So on Friday, September 7th, from 6 to 9 p.m. at Waldo's, a favorite local coffee shop hangout place in downtown, they'll be having a Nicaraguan art show. And so people locally are donating their artwork that has been created by Nicaraguan artists over the years. We've hosted dozens of them over the last 30, 35 years. And it will be a fundraiser as well as a way to learn about the tradition of Nicaraguan art, its expressions of revolution, its expressions of the culture and the history of the place.
When this is heard, it's probably going to have been passed, but it's
right.
It's a
But
suggestion
it'll
of the
continue.
thing. It'll continue.
It will
Yep.
continue.
And another one is Salsa on the Square, which is annual.
Annual, yes. So that will be Friday, September
September.
28th, the last Friday in September, from 5 to 11 p.m. on the square in Gettysburg. It will actually be on Carlisle Street, right in front of the Majestic. And people can come out. There will be vendors for food. There will be children's games. And there will be a live salsa band and dancing, as well as an excellent DJ when the band is on break. Yeah.
There have been some things written and reported lately. Let's start with written. New York Times, New York, Washington Post, New York, the New Yorker magazine. Anything we can read? Yeah.
So actually, The Guardian out of the UK has reported regularly on Nicaragua, and so I would recommend that people check that out. As well, the New York Times, less so the Washington Post, but still there, and also newspapers in Florida are a good English language source for information in Florida, because there are so many Nicaraguan immigrants that live there in that area.
And isn't there a current New Yorker issue?
So in the September 3rd issue of the New Yorker, they have an article online. It's titled "Fake News," in quotations, and unrest in Nicaragua. So again, this is one journalist's perspective. It's kind of his story, his perspective of how this current unrest has unfolded. But also NPR, National Public Radio, on Sunday posted an article about the number of asylum seekers going into Nicaragua. That number has now hit 200 asylum seekers a day from Nicaragua. Headed into Costa Rica. And we have certainly seen that among our friends in Nicaragua. I know of several who have chosen to go to Costa Rica.
We should have probably used that right away, but it's a dramatic way to end. It's probably the best indication of unrest is when people feel they must flee their country. And little Costa Rica, I'm sure, is going to have a tough time trying to handle immigration. If we in the United States are trying to close down borders, then poor Costa Rica is going to have just as much trouble at
Right,
200 a day
Yes.
trying to feed, house, and find jobs.
Yeah, and you can go to the NPR website and look for that article, and they have pictures of some of the refugee camps and those kinds of things that are being set up and to manage and to serve those trying to seek more economic stability for their families.
Nicaragua, a crisis, a political crisis on our doorstep. Our guest, Gretchen Natter, who is communications liaison for Project Gettysburg Leon, related to Nicaragua, executive director for the Gettysburg College Center for Public Service, and assistant dean of college life at the college. I'm Jerry Christensen, and for the Seminary Explorers, have a very good day.
You have been listening to The Seminary Explorers, a production of United Lutheran Seminary with campuses in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We invite you to visit our website at unitedlutheranseminary.edu. Opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of United Lutheran Seminary or the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.